Welcome to another Quantum Conversation, brought to you by acoustichealth.com. I'm Loren Gailey, and I invite you to sit back as we enter the quantum realm, that space of the greater part of you. It is your connection to infinite possibilities, infinite potential, and infinite mastery. We are exploring the shape of thought and emotion and how they are converted into frequencies that can heal and offer wellness, wholeness. My guest today is a scientific researcher. He is also a mathematician, and he creates frequencies and sound. Let's meet Don Adams. Don, thank you and welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Happy to meet you.
Happy to meet you too. This is a fascinating subject with sound and how it comes from multi-dimensions, and you are working with this on this physical realm, exploring it in your research and creating frequencies. So let's start with what the background is of this. How did this come to you?
Sure. I was involved for a number of decades with underground research groups. I was working professionally for companies in the States. I'm Canadian, but I often worked on contract for firms like Microsoft and Coke in Wichita. And so at a very young age, I got involved with some alternative science groups. This goes back to the 80s. Had a chance to get to know and work with and collaborate, starting off as a junior with people like Jerry Decker, who ran the old KeelyNet BBS. And so one of the things that would happen for us is we would often get exposed to emerging and exotic alternative technologies. These people were mostly engineers. Some of them were like world-renowned scientists, and this was a meeting hub that they would get together and just sort of have coffee talk. During that time, I was first exposed to Royal Rife, and so Rife was an optical scientist that pioneered the use of electromagnetic wave phenomena for the destruction of pathogenic microorganisms, and his basic premise was just that microorganisms that were disease-causing would have a resonant frequency, and that if the resonant frequency could be determined, then bombarding them with that frequency would elicit something akin to apoptosis, so cell death. Mm-hmm. And so I worked exploring the different resources that they were providing based on his research. And one of the things that occurred to me as I moved through the circles of that community and other similar communities was that it was a really viable technology which has now been adapted and adopted by a lot of large mainstream companies, although he was heavily persecuted for some time. But one of the things that had not ever been addressed was, could this technology be evolved, modified, and adapted towards engineering states relating to consciousness, emotions, thought, and mood? And so I began to investigate that, and was supported along the way in doing it. And so a lot of the frequency work that I do evolved from that sort of domain, but then we grew into being able to manipulate, literally the shapes of state.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and another indicator of the convergence of science moving into this realm of consciousness. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating and it's liberating because, I think that, it really puts us in a more empowered position. We're in the driver's seat so that now, we can really identify qualitatively and quantitatively, what the states are inherently and how to reproduce them. And, probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with, really well-known scientists like Emoto Masaru and
Yes,
sure.
yes.
And, Masaru's work is really seminal, for a lot of reasons. Some of the more critical ones are not well known in the public domain, and one of the tasks I've had is to take cross-disciplinary approach where I try to integrate other findings so that we come to a synthesized, holistic understanding. But to give an idea, one of the reasons that Masaru's work was and is so critical is because he was actually involved in a definitive approach towards how mental, emotional, and conscious states form topologically. And one of the things that's really missing, there's a fellow that does great work with kymatics.
Yes.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so what one of the things that's been missing in kymatics, when Hans Jenny and Ernst Chladni pioneered that work, they were identifying what the material envelope and shape of tones and tonal qualities were, and so it's really important to identify and catalog these. But another thing that's equally as important, perhaps in some cases more, is what do they mean? How do we interpret them? It's one thing to identify the shape of a tone, but then to understand interpretively, what information is actually associated with that shape and how it influences things like biology. That's critical, and that's the part that's been missing. Like I've had a few discussions with John Reed in the past, who's made great inroads in furthering, kymatics. He created the kymoscope, really excellent instrument. But the area of focus I've been looking at is, what do these shapes mean? And if you take a look at kymatics and you compare it to what people like Masaru were identifying, you really see an overlap between, water crystallization into standardized platonic filigreed shapes and to what's being examined in dynamic shaping forms that we see in the kymoscope and kymatics.
Yes, wouldn't that be fascinating? I mean, it does correlate, absolutely. Okay, so what do they mean, and how can we understand the shape of a tone? It also brings to mind the Tibetans, and they make the beautiful mandalas. That's energy there as well. Isn't that interesting? I love your cross-disciplinary approach.
I think you've raised actually a really important point. And bringing up the example of the sand mandalas that the Tibetans create. This really showcases how the natural world and sort of like universal absolutes that we can perceive partially in science come through intuitively. And some of the greatest breakthroughs in science, where we understand natural law and principles, have come originally through an intuitive process. As an example, the benzene ring in chemistry was first discovered in a dream state. When we take a look at the Lo Shu and other kinds of Chinese ancient artifacts, it turned out that Katja Walters discovered that there was a seminal link between some of these Chinese artifacts and genetics. If we take a look at the Tao symbol, where we've got the yin and the yang, what's interesting is that this is actually derived from how the sun moves in relation to the earth cyclically over a year. What they discovered is when they would post pegs, wooden pegs in the ground in a certain structure, that as time passed, the literal physical shape of the yin and yang Tao symbol would form as shadow casts on the surface. And the way that the I Ching was itself derived, like the hexagrams themselves, was that you would have observers of the passage of time making note of what was happening communally. And so it became like a standard association to, this is the tempo of the individual and the collective. Here is the scene or the stage of the play set as the sun moves over the course of a year. So I think your example of the Tibetan mandala is spot on.
Well, I think that is absolutely fascinating. I did not know that about the yin-yang symbol and the movement of the sun over the earth. Okay, that's pretty cool. So yes, links between all of this. You are pushing this forward. It's incredible work. So how do you apply this knowledge? We have Masaru Emoto's work with the cymatics, or you call it kymatics, and when we begin to understand and see how it influenced biology, you're actually doing this by producing sounds. And we could call it music, but these are frequencies and tones, and we're going to listen to some of those. But how has this evolved into your music or frequencies?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good question. You know, it's funny because I often get approached by professional DJs that want to, yeah.
That'd be good, though. Get it out.
No, it is. Yeah, it is. It's funny because it's a platform and venue that I never would have imagined or considered, and you know, it's gratifying that it's appreciated by that venue.
Wow, that would be really called high vibe music.
Yeah, I suppose it would. You know, the funny thing is what they're usually looking for is they want it to induce a psychotropic.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting. For like raves or something, for
Right.
dance parties. Well, that's interesting. If it can induce a love state.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I mean, and of course, you know, it has application towards that, and we have DJs that they're pursuing and they're incorporating and examining.
Okay, interesting.
But I mean, to your question, I mean, you know, what happens is that if you boil it right down, states are patterns of information. That's what they are. And so the frequencies that I make, you know, when I talk to someone who's a musician, you know, I don't know, your audience may be familiar with Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Gurdjieff was a esotericist who talked about something called objective music. And so his argument was, and he demonstrated the veracity of this, that most musicians are only familiar with subjective music. And he said that objective music is very different because subjective is something that's individually relative, but may not induce or elicit, you know, a common response. It won't evoke a response that has the same kind of, you know, accurate, tight envelope of experience, whereas objective music is very different. So, you know, examples of objective music would be, you know, we take a look at just as a, you know, as a story in the Bible where the Israelites marched around the walls of Jericho and they were instructed to, you know, play a loud sound at a certain tempo, at a certain rhythm, and then the walls of Jericho fell. And then, of course, we have the back to Tibet, you know, the description of National Geographic decades ago going to observe a ceremony of Tibetan monks where they stood at the base of an enormous cliff. The monks formed a half circle with a special select group of instruments, and by playing certain kinds of sounds, the National Geographic reportedly on film captured them levitating boulders straight up the cliff and then, you know, going up to the other side of the cliff. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, but now the thing is, I should point out that the frequencies I make can be played as sound, but because they're informational patterns, while a lot of people, including musicians, will say that they sound as though they have musical quality, like, you know, in some cases they might sound like a happy little tune. The reality is that these are information patterns, interference patterns, and so they can be played as sound, but they can also be played as a silent, varying magnetic field. And so one of the interests of the members on our groups they want to use these frequencies at work, or if they're going on a hike, or they're going to the gym, or they're going to go shopping, and they want to benefit from the effects of the frequencies. So, if you've got someone who's feeling down or depressed or whatever they're dealing with, depending on the type of frequency track that they want to benefit from, they may not always be in a position where they can, it's not like you can walk into the office and then crank the frequencies up and let them play through the whole office. And so one of the solutions that we've worked on, and we've come to some really, powerful, meaningful solutions, was providing members with a small portable device that would allow them to broadcast these frequencies quietly. And so the goal was to, can we construct a lightweight portable device that can emit the frequency as a varying magnetic field to provide a canopy, or a kind of a bubble of enclosure of protection or regeneration within a certain radius, within a certain distance. And so one of the devices that we have is, there's a few variations on it, but the idea is that, we have a small media player, and that media player has tracks on it, and then, users will loop the tracks. But then that little media player, which is, the ones that are often used are like the little Sony Walkman style, where it's like about an inch long, it's about, or maybe 2 inches long and maybe about an inch wide, and then the tracks are loaded digitally. And then from that little battery-operated Walkman player, we often recommend users plug in, it's a portable audio amp. It's made by a company called Boosteroo, and it's really low cost. I think it costs $23, and it increases the signal output by about 200 times, no noise distortion. And so in that audio amp, then they plug in coils. There's other kinds of instruments that can be used, but these are PEMF, like standard pulsed electromagnetic frequency coils. And so what they basically look like is, imagine you've got a standard pair of headphones or earbuds that you would plug into a Walkman, but instead of earbuds at the end, what you have is something that looks like little rubber hoops. And those little rubber hoops, on the inside of those hoops are copper wire coils, and then all they do is they pop it in their pocket and off they go. Or what they do is they strap it to like their arm or their leg, their torso, and just use like a tensor wrap or something. So that's super effective, and it lets someone enjoy the benefits of the frequencies. So you've got like an audible. When it's used audibly, we suggest a certain duration period and a certain amplitude or magnitude. If we're doing immersion, people often report some pretty unusual phenomena. We get reports of phenomena on our frequencies that is just not found in any other kind of sound therapy. And this is to the point of that we've had clinical studies on rapid blood terrain state changes, where we've got blood rouleau. We've got actually photos on our website of just like within 3 hours a state of rouleau is dispersed. So yeah.
Ah, well, that is fascinating. Okay, so we're going to listen to these frequencies. So you've got, that's fascinating about the silent emitter. It's as if we are becoming a walking frequency fields.
Yeah.
And it's not harmful, and it doesn't need to be limited. You said that they loop it, and nobody can hear it. It's not audible, but the frequencies are going out into the field and affecting others as well.
What we find is with the hoop setup, it's got about a 5-foot radius. And so now one thing I should say too is that it's always been understood from the get-go that this is an experimental protocol, based partially on things like right frequencies. So this technology, members investigate and apply it, and then we have SCADs, like thousands of reports from across the planet. But this is not FDA approved, and it's not approved as a medical device, and it's meant purely as experimental technology.
Yes. Okay.
And one thing I should mention too is that contraindications. We've been documenting results from members since 2007.
Good.
And one of the things that we suggest, we don't have solid proof or evidence of this, but based on inference and also just subjective observation and study, would not typically recommend this technology to someone who is epileptic or suffers from migraines. Now, having said that, we have had users that have sometimes severe chronic migraines who have told us, but again, this should not be taken, as anecdotal evidence. We're just saying that this is what we've been told, that apparently it has benefited them, people that were chronic migraine sufferers. But the reason that we don't suggest it for epilepsy is that for most frequencies, there is a stroboscopic quality to them, because an information pattern is repeated until the body and mind become entrained to the information pattern. And by the way, that information pattern is derived both from environmental and natural cues. And that's why a lot of times when people listen to them, it's like they may have never heard it before, but it seems familiar to them. And the reason that it seems familiar is because it's actually coinciding with informational patterns that would be naturally resident in certain states and situations within them.
Okay, so informational patterns. Let's take a listen to a sample and get a real experience of what we're talking about here. This one is called Good Luck Evoker. Tell us a little bit about this before we hear it.
Sure. So when people listen to this, it will sound like a very simplistic set of tones. And in most cases, people will feel kind of like an optimistic, kind of cheery type feeling. But they'll also, most listeners will have a strong sense of familiarity. It's as though they've heard it before, but they haven't. And the reason for that is that it's literally a topological map of the state a person experiences when they feel lucky.
A topological map of what a person feels like when they feel lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back and talk about that, but let's listen. Very interesting. That was kind of interesting, the lower tones that come in. How do you make this frequency expression, this information? How does it come to you?
All right, well, there's an example that I use often at conferences, places where I'm presenting, or at trade shows. And so the example is, imagine that you have a piece of paper, and that paper it's wrapped up in a big roll. And the paper is, say, 4 feet wide, and you take that paper roll, you put it on the floor, and you stretch it out, and so maybe you've got, about 30 feet of a paper strip that's about 3 to 4 feet wide, and it's in front of you. Mm-hmm. So now you stand at the one end of it, and you take a little children's wooden toy block, like a little wooden, cube, and you take that cube and you dip it in an ink pad, so it's sopping with ink. Then you take that cube and you throw it in a trajectory, an arc, over the paper. And so what happens is when the cube lands on the paper, it's going to roll and toss and spin. So as the cube with the ink moves across the paper, it may, in one instant, land on a side of the cube. And so there you have what's like a square imprint. And then as the cube is still moving in its trajectory, it leaves that flat surface and then it spins on an edge. So you see the cube, it's skidding as it's moving across the paper. So now you have a line. And then, in another instant, the cube is rotating and the vertex or the corner of the cube imprints the paper. And so as the cube moves across the paper, it leaves a streak in shape. So when the cube comes to a rest and you let the ink dry, you look back at the travel path, and what you see is a bunch of odd shapes in a linear stretch. Now, if a person if they were able to take that path of, abstract objects that the square had left, and they could peel the shape of that path up and then reassemble it, it might be, a situation where a person could derive what kind of object it was. Like if you were to unpeel or unwrap the dried ink shape, it would be discernible to a person that, there's a good chance that this is probably a cube. So what happens is when we experience emotions or mental states or physical states, the physical states of harmony or disharmony, these have shapes to them. Sometimes these shapes are three-dimensional. Often they're more than that. But what happens is that the mind and the emotional body naturally associates a geometric form to different states. So when it's presented with a geometric form that corresponds to a given state, it recognizes it. So when you listen to Good Luck Evoker, every single tone that you hear actually is a facet or a component of the object that represents the state moving through time. So when you hear like a low tone, what's actually happening here is that low tone represents part of the structure of the object. When you hear a high tone, so we could theoretically say that, okay, so when the cube is moving, the flat square surface of the cube might be a low tone. When the cube is moving and it's the edge of the cube on the paper, that might be a high tone. And so when the vertex of the corner of the cube imprints the paper, this might be a median tone. Now, I'm just giving these as examples because in most cases, the objects, the geometric sort of hyperdimensional objects that represent the states themselves are complex. And so when you listen to the frequencies that I make, in some frequencies, there will be, thousands of different tones. And when I design the tones, we design the tones to a decimal precision accuracy past the floating point to 9 positions. So it's extremely precise. When they're rendered, the rendering is within about 3 positions. And the interesting thing is I've never released the full potency frequencies to the public domain. All of the frequencies released that have elicited the profound effects that people have witnessed over the years, these have been intentionally diluted in potency, and yet they still have extremely powerful effects.
That's a lot what you just said there. Very fascinating. All right, so there is a geometric hyperdimensional object that represents the state.
Right.
And these are mental, emotional states.
Yeah, and also we see correlations with physical state. Like one of the things that we had done is we had examined changes in biology. When a person's going through let's say distress or a positive state, you'll get biological markers affectations that can be measured. So as an example, you'll get thermal changes across the skin. You'll get galvanic skin response changes, variances in millivolts. And so a lot of times markers of that topology can be viewed directly. There's a story in ancient Greece. In some ways, the ancient Grecians were more advanced in diagnostics in certain ways than we were today. A common practice that they used was if a doctor had a patient come in, they'd have a flat granite stone table. And on that stone table, they would spread a thin film of wet clay. And they would ask the person to lie down on the wet clay. So after a certain period of time, they would ask the person to get up, and the doctor would let the clay dry. But what he would find was that the differential in what spots dried faster than others gave him a thermal scan of heat changes occurring regionally within the anatomy of the person. And so this becomes a rudimentary primitive topological map of what's going on inside that person geometrically.
Isn't that fascinating?
Oh,
That
yeah.
is beautiful that you are so adept at this. Again, you're cross-disciplinary, and you're coming up with these models that represent the geometry.
Right.
When we listen to another one here, let's talk about other ways to use these frequencies. We did just do the good luck evoker. What was the way that you came up with the geometric object, hyperdimensional object of that?
There's quite a lengthy story with a lot of complexity and techniques associated with it, but the way it began was I had started off working on a math model that was meant to forecast certain kinds of changes in individuals and collectives insofar as their behavior impulses went.
Mm.
And there's a long story behind that, but what I found was the data that I was modeling, and this was a new, you had a number of components. One of the components was numeric series. And so the idea was to apply a certain type of stochastic analysis in numeric series that would model changes in behavior over time. And what happened was I was talking with a fellow that I know. He was the owner. I know he was a friend of mine. He was the owner of a health food store franchise. And I'd come back from some travels. He wanted me to come over for Christmas dinner. And so we were sitting there after dinner with a glass of wine. He asked me how things were going. And so I told him, and he said to me, he said, well, did you ever think of, instead of just using it as a forecasting tool, did you ever think of, applying what you're researching towards evoking responses? And I had mildly thought of it, but it was never really at the time that's just not what I was focusing on. And so I said to him, I said, yeah, I guess that's probably doable. And so I thought about what he said, and I was living in Victoria, BC at the time. And so after my visit, I went back, and I had been suffering from chronic sore feet for a number of years, and busy person, didn't have time, to fuss over it. It was just an inconvenience. Yeah. And so I was at my condo one day, and I was doing laundry. It was midday, and I was reading a book. I had the fireplace going. I would go back and forth between dishes, laundry, reading the book on the mantle, and I was on my feet. And my feet just started feeling sore, and I was just like, I went to my computer system, and I sat down, and I thought, okay, so what if instead of modeling, individual or collective behavior, what if I did like a numeric series, and I had a number of proprietary tools that I was using that would represent behavior and activities.
Okay.
And so one of the things that can be done is that we'll use 2D, 3D sort of dimensional numeric representations of an action. And so I thought, well, what if I were to just use this tool and this collection of tools that I was using to model my feet, and then factor in the disharmony, and then within the model there's a process called phase conjugation or phase cancellation. Yeah.
Okay.
So I thought, well, what if I just phase cancel out the state of the sore feet, and I model this numerically as a numeric series, and then the idea was to take that stream, that series, and then convert it. There's a process called sonification. Sonification is just when you take a data stream and you just convert it into, audible tones. So I did that, and I converted the data stream into an audio playable format, and I stuck it on loop on a computer at the time with really low-end speakers, so low-quality speakers, but just was never much of an audio file, so it just didn't matter to me. And I just did it for a kick, I just to see what would happen. And I went back to my chores. I had it playing loud, and I was at home. There were the neighbors. I was living in a nicer, sort of how do I say, closed community at the time, and so I was able to play it loud without being interrupted much, and so I let it play for about 3 hours, just looped, and I'd almost forgotten that it was playing because I was just so involved with what I was doing. And then when I was standing next to the mantle at the fireplace reading, I had a sudden, very, very rapid, shocking sensation in my feet. It scared me, and I put the book down, and I looked down at my feet were bare because I was just running around the condo. And what it felt like was, imagine you took a big piece of tinfoil, and you crumpled it up into a ball, and then you let go of it, and then the foil starts to uncrumple. So it felt physically like that kind of sensation in the center of my feet, but also as though somebody had injected my feet with some kind of like Vicks Vapor Rub, like a heating sensation. So it was like a burning heating sensation, not painful, but very intense. And I suddenly, as this was, and it was so intense, it was almost like my feet felt sunburned intensely, not painful, but just like, and I suddenly realized, geez, those frequencies have been playing, and I got a little bit scared, and I ran into my room. And I unplugged the speakers, and I was kind of, thinking like, did I just screw myself? Like, am I in trouble? Like, is this gonna, like, what does this mean? And I thought, well, do I call the doctor? Do I make an appointment at the clinic? And I thought, well, if I go down, what am I going to tell them?
Yeah.
It's like I made these sounds on my computer, and then this happened, But then when I realized, I thought they would just think I was a nutter. So I stayed in the condo, and after about, I think at the time it was maybe 20, 30 minutes passed, the sensation went away, and my feet felt amazing. And the chronic problem that I had, it was permanently gone. It never came back.
Interesting.
So
it's interesting where the mind went in that process, and just as you waited it out to experience it, it left.
Yeah, well, my initial response was panic.
Yeah.
But sure, yeah, after the panic subsided, then it felt like a surprising delirium, almost like I can't believe this is happening.
Wow, and this from your own experience, and that became your truth. And then from there it evolved. It's very fascinating because listening to you explain the numeric series or the numeric representation of an action that you had access to this information, it reminds me of Music from the Universe on my website, which was my father's work. He was a computer music researcher, and he was responsible for, I guess, the digitization of music, creating computer music on a software platform. He made the music with mathematical algorithms. So you know, listening to you speak, you're speaking at that level where, you know, you have that and you applied it, you sonified it, you converted it into tones. So that's really interesting. But in this case, you're actually using models of actual actions.
We did that. For me, when this was happening, I needed to know, for my own sense of clarity, being, you know, having a science background, I needed to know if this was some kind of a psychosomatic only influence. I needed to understand what had happened. And so I actually had contacted a bunch of online communities that were involved with things like right frequency work. And I said to them straight up, listen, I had a weird experience. It's kind of freaked me out. You know, I'd be willing to share some of this stuff that I've done for free. I didn't tell them, you know, what it was, you know, or what they could expect. I said, you know, I told them, I said, you know, I don't want to tell you what to expect. It's experimental. I'd love your feedback. You know, tell me what you think has happened. And you know, my thought at the time was, if I get objective feedback, because this is really kind of like a you know, a first run hit at doing, you know, a double blind type test, right? So about 40 people jumped up and they said, sure, we'll try it out. And I didn't hear anything back from them for a number of days. And when I did hear back, they were all completely freaked out. They were mostly excited, and they were saying, like,
they were thrilled, amazed,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
That good kind of freak out, like, wow, what is this?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is, on the flip side, they could be used to harm, but not really, because this is phase conjugation, right? This was cancellation. It's like what we know with sound, and some communities in our neighborhood use this phase cancellation to quiet traffic. They record the traffic, they record the volume of the traffic, and they phase cancel it so it actually reduces the sound of the traffic.
Right. I should clarify something too. The very first track that I made, it actually incorporated a few different aspects. So one of the aspects was a phase cancellation mode, but the other one was superimposition or superposition. And so the idea was modeling the feet in a healthy, you know, balanced state. So the idea was to, if my feet feeling ill, at ease, or in pain could be represented by a noise distortion, then what happens if I superimpose something that would, you know, get rid of the noise distortion, not just through a cancellation, but through the imposition of a representation of the feet in a harmonious state. And what I found was that that was really a big key to success, and that was how do we represent, you know, the ideal model state and then superimpose that. Phase cancellation is very helpful if we want to neutralize. It's not super helpful if we want to create a preferred or desired state, because all it does is it just levels out an existing one. You know, like with wave interference, we have constructive and destructive interference. And so destructive interference is phase cancellation. Constructive interference is when we have, you know, two or more waves that hybridize and then produce a more resilient sort of child, you know, offspring wave. And so one of the things that we began to experiment and examine was there's an interstitial boundary that occurs, and this is really a big key of the work that I do. Within consciousness in the body, that interstitial state is the internal domain of the organism. It's the boundary between that and then external radiational natural systemic rhythms. And so, there's a really good book called The Secret Life of Plants, and they talk about a scientist in there who had been using a biological antenna array. So he had a cube with a gelatinous biomass, living biomass on the inside of the cube. And he was using that in connection with a radio telescope. He wanted to see if he could detect wave radiation from space that would correspond to the wavelength of the biomass. And it turns out that he did. Not only did he, but some of his findings were just really profound and bizarre. But his approach was so successful that in many of the large observatories across the planet, they've actually now purchased and house his device within their large-scale radio satellites. And so one of the things that I did is I have a number of proprietary tools and methods that I use, but one of the things that I did is I created my own specialized exotic version of a biological antenna array so that we could detect signals analogous to impulses from space that would correspond to influences that we would naturally recognize. So as an example, when stellar influences affect behavior, what's usually happening is that there's a modulation of pulse and rhythm through things that are gravitational and magnetic in nature. So these types of vectors will affect an organism's behavior. So when you have a full moon, the pressure density and the rapidity of cerebral spinal fluid will change. So the actual rhythm pulse, like the cycle, the oscillation of the fluid flow up and down the spine will dramatically change, velocity, rate-wise. But the pressure density on the fluid that's in the spine will also change. So if you could imagine, if you wanted to see someone's mood change or their behavior impulse change, and you were to apply compression to the fluid, the actual pressure, like the pounds per square inch type idea, so how much pressure is that fluid under in their spine, and how fast is it cycling back and forth? You can cause some pretty rapid changes in their mood, behavior, biasing of emotions and thoughts. And so when we look at natural background rhythms that are being modulated, by these environmental factors, and we take this as an external canvas of influence, and then we take a look at what's going on within the organism biologically, that interstitial boundary that occurs between the outside radiations and the internal cycles, this becomes much of the canvas of conscious experience. So like a really good analogy is, imagine that you're in a gymnasium and the lights are off, and you're sitting in a chair, and in front of you is a large white film projection screen. So on the projection screen in front of you, there's a film projector broadcasting an image. So it'd be like watching a movie in the theater. But now imagine that behind that film screen is another projector, and it's broadcasting a different image. Now imagine that that film screen is translucent, not opaque. You have two film projectors broadcasting on the same surface from either end. So one's playing one movie, the other's playing a different movie. They meet at the surface of the translucent screen. What you see then are two broadcast images from two film projectors merging into this sort of singularity, this merging, changing, converging, diverging imagery on the translucent screen. So that screen, that translucent screen, is like the frame of experience a person has at a point in time-space. So the projector in the front is what's going on inside of you, like, in other words, the cycles that are driven internally. And then on the other side are the rhythms coming at you. And then what you're having the bias influence, the drivers, is the terrain. When you're looking out the window of a moving car, that's the flat of the screen. And so the way that my frequencies work is that most of them combine a representation of the internal state and the external state, so that when the body is exposed to it through resonant entrainment, it recognizes that kind of experience qualitatively. And when we adjust things like the volume, then we can actually, when you want to, if you superimpose information signal, then the potency of that signal will increase by amplitude. It's the same thing, but there's this concept in frequency research that's just called, dominance theory. So if you, for instance, if you went to a concert and you didn't like the music and it was really disturbing, your body and your mind would be affected by that. But if you had a small Walkman and you had, music or something that you enjoyed, and you took the headphones out and you put them in your ears and you cranked the volume up on your Walkman, even though you're surrounded by this noise, your brain, the actual brain cells themselves would lock onto the signal coming out of your headphones because of the dominance theory, because of the proximity of the signal and the amplitude that's closest to you.
Okay, you are really educating us on the real science behind this. It's almost as if it's like the science of astrology when you're talking about the moon and the cosmic influence. It brings to mind as above, so below, the sage wisdom. You're working with these frequencies. You're working with the numeric models, the representations of this. It's just fascinating.
One of the things that was really bizarre to me is that I had always been very skeptical of astrology, and my personal take is I think there's a lot of fiction and a lot of anthropomorphizing that happens in astrology, but I think that astrology as a practice has not gotten fair press for a long time because I took a serious look into it, and what I discovered is that without question, and there is so much ample evidence, like scientific evidence, from so many different groups, individuals, institutes, that clearly point to nominal, real physical change occurring due to, stellar background influences, not least of which is there was an interesting report that had come out, this is documented on our website, where hard angular aspects between planets like Mercury and Mars were actually found. This is mainstream science. This is one of the best arguments that astrologers can use when they're arguing against a skeptic, and sadly most of them haven't heard of this or they're not aware of it. But back around the 1950s, there's a large company, I think it was like AT&T, they kept having power blackouts across the continental U.S. So that you had cables that were buried underground, and they would just have these cycling brownouts and blackouts, and they couldn't figure out what it was. So they brought in an engineer. It took him a year to study it, and he couldn't find what the problem was until he began to realize that there was an exact correlation to the time of when the blackouts occurred and their duration, and to when there was hard angular aspects going on specifically with Mercury and Mars. And he postulated that there was a shear wavefront that was coming in, some kind of stellar radiation that they hadn't examined previously was causing an interrupt. So they devised a shielding for this, and the blackouts stopped. Now, you think about this, if the human body, if our biology, if our fragile water-based biology is, more sensitive than hard, like physical hardware, like, wires and cables buried deep underground, if those stellar influences can knock out hardware buried under the earth, what are they doing to our bodies?
Yes, and this is why understanding, right, whether it's Vedic astrology or normal mainstream astrology, it's interesting to see that. So what I find fascinating is that you've looked into it yourself and you're like, without question, there's clearly stellar influence on our behavior and our bodies as well. And so when we were preparing for this show, you were checking into the perfect timing. So what do you use to understand your own timing?
There's a couple of really good resources. There's a document that describes astrobiology, and then there's another one that has to do with chaos theory and its connection to astrology. There's a number of candidates that have been proposed as to how and why astrology generally may function. And what I've done is I've surveyed a lot of them. Though there's a couple that really stand out. So there's changes in magnetism, both on the Earth and in the atmosphere. There's also small changes in gravitational, so fluctuation in background gravitational fields. There's another one that's I believe it's called the Leiden effect, and this has to do also with the gravitational fluctuation, but it has to do with extremely small variance between the planets. Now, we also have a table that shows, people have heard that, for instance, the moon and the tides change. We see differentials in tidal force in relation to moon position. And so there's a table on that page that discusses the actual weights of the changes of gravity on biology itself. The London dispersion force, that's the one that I was thinking of. And so this is a weak intermolecular force, I'm just reading this off the wiki description, arising from quantum-induced instantaneous polarization of multipoles in molecules. They can therefore act between molecules without permanent multipole moments. Now the idea basically is that when you have a weak force arising from the changing in planetary positions, that this can propagate. Now, one thing too that is often not discussed is that there's a really interesting article that came out about the infrared footprint that's associated with biological expression. So when we take a look at John Reed's description of how sound propagates, and he's correct in his description, and he does a good job describing it, where, if you are singing or you express something, it comes out as a sphere, like a little bubble. This is what it actually looks like. A lot of times when we think of frequencies, we think of a 2D graph of a square sinusoidal waveform. This is only the graph of the wave. The actual structure of the wave, especially if it's a sound wave, is spherical. And so, sound dissipates in accordance with the inverse square law over time, but the infrared footprint doesn't. So that means that biological expression, the infrared, signaling information associated with that, it propagates a very long distance. So when we take a look at, when an astrologer, describes how aspects forming between planetary bodies may have a certain affectation, we can go into like a lexicon and, well, what happens if Mars squares Saturn? What does that mean? And then they take a look at things like signs and houses. And there's a lot of arguments against astrology where they talk about, well, haven't the stars changed over time? Isn't there like a 13th sign, all the stuff? But the basic archetypal premise is about associating behavioral characteristics with these very large masses as having certain meaning that's been observed over time. And so, with our frequencies, especially in that one clinic example, what we found was that when we modeled both internal states and some representational external influences, such as stellar aspects, what we found was that there had to have been enormous change in the magnetic signature, like the magnetic field strength of the blood cells themselves.
Very cool that, yes, the movement of cosmic bodies and stellar radiation, yes, does affect us. Okay.
Well, there's one other example I would
Sure.
encourage your listeners to check out, and this is just hardcore evidence, and it's easy to watch. A fellow Canadian, he's a neuroscientist at Laurentian University. His name is Michael Persinger. He uploaded a lecture to YouTube, and it is called No More Secrets.
Mm.
And so what he talks about in there is the relationship of the magnetosphere, so that canopy, that atmospheric canopy around our planet, and individual brains, an individual mind experience. So one of the things that happens is that when the magnetosphere, the atmospheric canopy of our planet, is modulated, and this can be modulated by, like, cosmic particles, cosmic winds, any kinds of external stellar influences or changes, gravitational changes, that whatever is happening in the Earth's atmosphere will have a direct effect on individual and collective humanity, to the degree of causing changes in things like stock market, pricing and timing.
Very interesting. Okay, so I know in this community, we're feeling that this is getting stronger, right? The sun is changing. Are you on top of any new information with the change in the cosmos right now?
I try to stay abreast of things that are important in developments on a regular basis.
Solar flares, for example.
Sure. There's been a disturbance in the heliosphere envelope over the last number of years. There's been changes in its size, and that's been alarming scientists. I've heard through the grapevine around April 9th that there may be a good bombardment, like a coronal mass ejection, CME, coming in. Very good chance of heightened activity, like over the next couple of years, for sure. One of the things that's often not discussed, but it's pretty important, we know that there are regular cycles. So we have like an 11-year solar cycle and other solar cycles. But one of the things that can happen is that although they're very small in relation to the mass of the sun, the actual position of the planets themselves, especially the larger planets, in relation to the sun, can have a kind of modulating effect on solar activity. So what you see, it is really super interesting. Like here we are, where we're in this dynamic, cycling system, and it really is something that can be correlated to human behavior and experience.
Again, when we think of eclipses and the power and the transition of the collective humanity through those times, this is all, again, being cross-examined.
Yeah.
And right now, we are in a Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like a Mercury retrograde when we're not even in a Mercury retrograde.
Sure.
And this is kind of what you're talking about here. It's this outside influence. So as above, so below.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's something that's causing us to experience a behavior, what is your take on that? Is it something coming up from us to be transformed?
I think it's a good question, and I think that there's a few different things going on. One is that we can really view elements of astrology as being a kind of a clock. And so, there's arguments to be made from different sides. I've heard the argument that, well, is it possible that human beings themselves might actually be causing, through some kind of quantum conscious link, disturbances on other planets? And I think that what's important is to understand the nature of cycles themselves. So, sometimes cycles will clock in a harmonious and synchronistic manner with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they don't. And, if you have a system where, say you've got a person that has their own personal cycle, and then you have the sun and other planets that have their own cycles, and they might be going along just fine. There's a synchronicity occurring, so the person doesn't feel super agitated, by gravitational changes elicited by, a heavy full moon. But then other things can come up that can cause disturbances. So we could have variations in, like we talked about the magnetosphere, different kinds of activity in the upper atmospheres. There could be also variations in the ambient magnetic field, even in the soil. There was a fellow named Callahan, Professor Callahan, and what he found was that there was a direct correlation between the magnetic field strength in topsoil, I think he was measuring in milligauss, between long-standing aggressive and, pacifistic behavior. So in other words, he would find a very different magnetic field strength in Ireland, in compared to temperate countries, or tropical Mediterranean countries in certain cases. And he found that over time, as the magnetic field strength in soil changed, it had a direct effect on the collective behavior of that population. So we have a lot of different elements that can come to play. I think the question that you asked is an important one, and it's one that we need to look at different avenues to fully understand.
Yes, we were just talking on our show recently about the emotions of the people living in an area of volcanoes, and they're agitated, and they're actually, when they subdue or transmute that feeling and that collective behavior, the volcanoes calm down. And the same with earthquakes. So this is interesting. This is all more of your cross-disciplinary research that you do, and connecting the dots across all avenues and seeing these patterns. Let's talk about how we can use these then in our physical body. Let's go listen to another sample. You've got things for DNA, for manifestation, spiritual attunement, and even a star portal. Let's talk about a star portal.
In a lot of cases, what we're looking at is we want to try to replicate what that interstitial state would be like. So the idea is, how would a person feel like if? So if a person's experiencing a certain kind of sensation, how might that be mapped geometrically? And then once it's mapped and it's played back, what kind of things, are experienced? We've had some pretty out there stories from users, and sometimes they're pretty out there even for me.
Okay.
Yeah, but some of the phenomena, even though it's intense, is explainable. So like one of the things that often happens is a common experience with our users is that they have a certain type of visual hallucination, so that they'll literally see, like physically actually see blue sparks. They'll be listening to certain frequencies. One of the things that happens, especially if they're doing it audibly, is they loop the tracks, and so the body becomes entrained to it. And when this first started to happen, I think it was, it was pleasurable. They enjoyed it, but it was a bit freaky, and they were wondering why this was happening. And we've got a few theories as to why we think people are seeing sparks. Sometimes they see other things, like polygonal objects and stuff. But the star portal, this is really a map, or just sort of a sensation of a person that, what they might experience in kind of like a dreamlike quality, if they were traveling through something that was sort of extra dimensional.
And so I would imagine that we can use these in meditation. This seems like maybe an out-of-body experience or a cosmic journey.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, let's listen. again, it's just very fascinating, the frequencies. It's unlike anything that we hear in conventional music, and it's frequency. This is the sound of frequencies. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the healing aspects of these.
Sure.
You've got a healing package. Some of these are used to change or to superimpose the model of perfect bodily function, organs, health, wellness.
Yeah, what we wanted to do is we wanted to try to come up with a model that would represent when an organism was experiencing things like regeneration or recuperation. And so, in the early days when we first started off, the goal was to try to survey what an average response across a number of people would be like, and then try to come up with something that was a homogeneous averaged response that would fit most people. You're always going to have variance. It's very true to say that, people have individual constitutions.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're using our frequencies, we find that in most cases, most of our frequencies work super well for about 80% of people. And then you've got a 20 percentile in there that, it's a gray zone. There's also the small degree of fluctuation over time. So as an example, some people will have really intense response rates very rapidly, with regularity. Other people might have a really intense reaction response to a frequency, and then it might slow down. And then what's happening here is it's clocking to lunar cycles. So the next time they use the frequency at a similar lunar cycle, they notice that intensity back. But for what happens with the healing frequencies, and again, it's important to remember that these are not FDA approved. What we've done is we've simply observed and collected reports back from users. But we've seen some astounding results. On a regular basis, we've gotten reports back where, we've literally had people say that, they've cut their hands with a knife in the kitchen, and they were upset because they were about to go on a honeymoon. And it was a good deep gash. And when they were using the frequencies, they said that the degree of accelerated healing and regeneration was beyond anything they'd experienced before. We've also seen situations where, and so this is gratifying, right? I mean,
mm-hmm. Okay, so when we understand that the universe is created with sound, here are the frequencies. So I love that you've modeled wellness, and you're replicating wellness with the frequencies.
Yeah.
That's just fascinating. You are on the cutting edge. Isn't it beautiful?
It's beautiful, and as a science person, I mean, I have a creative aspect to me, but I look at it also from utility. Like if it's practically useful and it feels good, then that's huge for me.
Yeah. Well, this is for so many things we can share. Our listeners can look at the special offer link and see the listing of all of the various frequencies in the healing kits. I mean, it's everything from eye and teeth and regeneration and sleep easy, or the lymphatic system and brain and nerve and diabetes, DNA repair, eye healing, anti-cancer, chi strengthener, really quite fascinating there. But you're also using this on a larger scale, a broader scale. One is ascension, and that right there is fascinating because ascension, we're all working on that. What does this mean to you, ascension, and how did you come up with these frequencies for that?
If you talk to different people from different backgrounds, they'll often give you, maybe similar comms, but there can often be differences in how they evaluate that. Like what they expect, what they imagine ascension would be. And so the approach that I took was really looking at it from the standpoint of something that would be fulfilling to an individual regardless of what their philosophical take on it was. And what that boiled down to was a really strong sense of self-actualization, tangible form of self-actualization. But there's also this, there's a concept, a state in physics, Bose-Einstein condensate. What that basically means is you have a superconductive medium, so information can flow without background resistance. So energy flowing, without any kind of significant resistance. So one of the things we wanted to do was model something that was akin to the properties of a Bose-Einstein condensate type sensation. So when they're using the ascension frequencies, the idea is to give them a strong, tangible, energetic foundation, to actually achieve, something that would be in line with the common theme that most people would have with how that would feel, what that sensation would be like. I should also mention, too, that some of the frequencies have been used by healers for quite a while by a large number of people, and we see some pretty profound state change in biological improvement. A lot of times when people have infections or disease-type states, we get stories back about their observations of improvement. Some frequencies have been tested more than others, so we have more reports back. And most of the frequencies on our site have been ruggedly field tested for many years. The diabetes frequencies was an experimental prototype. It's only been tested mildly. Those frequencies are provided individually for free. And what we do sometimes is some of our if it's we have gotten some pretty consistent, decent feedback on the diabetes tracks, but this was only for class 1 and 2 diabetes, and the changes were good, but they weren't. It's not like they were cured of diabetes. What we got back were reports in blood sugar balance normalization, but those frequencies are free because they're still in the process of testing, and also the anti-cancer frequency itself. Similar scenario, individually free, because that one also has not been tested thoroughly. But for those that want to get the well-tested healing practitioner kits, for example, the anti-cancer, and it's the emotions of what anti-cancer would feel like. That's the anti-cancer track. That one's provided with that collection as a bonus, as the diabetes ones are. So you really the other tracks that are in there. But the dental shield track, we've had consistent, amazing benefits reported from users in that. So.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. I know that comes up a lot for people, and there's a question of can you grow back teeth, but this is more of a shield for keeping the teeth healthy.
The reports that we've gotten back for the dental shield were super interesting. And as an example, somebody that had an infection that they weren't even aware of, they were experiencing some kind of discomfort. And so they started to use the dental shield, and what they found was that in a very short period of time, there was a boil or an abscess that erupted, and it sounds gross, but there was a bunch of pus that erupted, and so they felt relieved afterwards. Sometimes working with the frequencies, especially if you're using it for an intense or acute condition, in most cases the frequencies experiences are pleasurable. But if you're dealing with an acute situation, it can be a little bit, there can be certain disturbing properties with it. And as an example, there's a thing called the Herxheimer reaction. Herxheimer reaction is when if you have an infection that's pervasive in your body and you have a mass die-off of bacterial organisms, then what can happen is when those organisms die off, for a couple of days, you can have flu-like symptoms. It's not that you have the flu, but there'll be symptoms like that. And you can also get things like boils erupting. This is your body trying to clear stuff out. And so for those that have ever used Rife frequencies before, it's very common. If Rife frequencies are being used to destroy a pathogenic infection, a Herxheimer reaction is common because when they use Rife frequencies to target a very specific microorganism, when it's killed, you have this dead matter that's now in your body. and the body has to flush it out. And so it's a stress reaction, it's a toxicity reaction. So, when you go through that, you need to drink lots of water, flush it out of your system, like you need to take it easy, that kind of thing. And a lot of times, we can actually see an analogy or an analog between emotional cleansing. A lot of times people use our frequencies to purge toxic emotional states out. So if someone's dealt with shock or trauma or grief,
Mm-hmm.
People that are going through heartbreak,
Yeah.
we have frequencies like we have an Ibogaine emulation. We have frequencies related to heart states. So if someone's gone through an intense emotional breakup and trauma and they're in shock over that, they can expect, if they're using the frequencies properly, they can expect on average to oscillate through periods of euphoria, so deep pleasure. And this is something that users often get attracted to because they almost, I think one of the terms they use is a sonic high or sonic crack high, because they feel really good. Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you use the frequencies right, it's people get really energized and they feel like a kid again, and they get really happy and bouncy. But the other thing too is that if you're purging something out of your system, if it's emotional, mental baggage, that's still there's work involved. And so what can happen is you might use the frequencies really intensely, and you may literally purge afterwards. I had a problem with my leg a few years back, and I didn't know what was going on with it, and I attached an electrode plate to my inner thigh, and I ran the frequencies overnight. And when I got up the next day, this is not an exaggeration, I had a boil on the inside of my thigh that was about, it must have been like 3 to 4 inches wide, and it was probably about at least a half an inch or more high, with a big white head. It was just full of pus. And I lanced it with a big canvas needle, and my leg felt fantastic after that. And I remember when I was sleeping at night, when I had the frequencies playing through that plate on my leg, that I had a really bizarre, like, itching sensation, and it was disturbing my sleep. I didn't know at the time what was going on, but when I woke up and I saw the boil, I realized that, something had been killed off, right? And so, yeah, so people that want to use the Healing Practitioner Kit, what I would suggest is, some of those frequencies are pretty powerful. And so, you're going to get good results from it, but it's very important to read the instructions and the how-to manual that go with it to get the best results.
Good for those who are in the healing practice, chiropractic, wellness, therapists and things. Okay, wonderful. Some of the other frequencies that you use are for success and motivation. And one that strikes my interest too is in the Ascension Primer, you've got the DNA Sweet Spin. We're going to hear a sample of this, but talk a little bit about this frequency set here.
Sure. That's been a long-time favorite, and that was one of our original frequencies. The very first response that most people have when they first hear it is they laugh or they giggle.
Good.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if people are familiar. I'm going to guess that they are with biofeedback, the SCIO, QXCI.
Yes.
I've known a number of practitioners that use that device, and what's interesting is that our frequencies are often detected by the QXCI or SCIO, but what's interesting is that the device doesn't know how to interpret our frequencies. So what it does is it finds in its database a label that it finds is the most closest, and the way that it describes our frequencies is as cartoon cycles in the brain. And so we find this very humorous, because like, people that use our frequencies during or before they have an SCIO treatment, the that device and other similar devices, they'll always detect the presence of our frequencies, but they'll label it.
Really?
Yeah. And so when you hear DNA sweet spin, it'll have a very strange kind of cartoon quality to it. But most of the DNA frequencies these are signals that are designed to increase coherency. Basically DNA itself is a helix antenna, and so its main purpose is to store and transmit, biological information, to also to transduce information. So all of the DNA tracks that we've created are meant to cohere the field transduction and signaling in DNA.
Very cool. All right, let's take a listen. It is so fascinating just to feel what goes on in the body with each of these frequency sets. It's like that one was very sparkly and uplifting and almost takes the thought away. All thought. It was just very centering. It was very interesting.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes, people will react really strongly and really fast. I know, I do. It's as soon as it comes on,
Yeah.
it's gripping.
I love it because it's the body in training to these frequencies. If we are imposing frequencies that are enhancing, or in that case, cohering the field for our DNA, that is just exquisite, really cool. And we can certainly feel it, and it feels good. We have time for one more. Let's take a listen to the manifestation meditation.
Sure.
Electric Blue Fire Star. Tell us about this one.
That's super intense, and that one's basically for it's a big motivational life changer. We also have neuroteleportal. That's a really super intense one too. But the one that you're about to play, that's one of our most popular ones. EBFS, Electric Blue Fire Star. That's a gripping one too. You might want to brace yourself a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And we will do the Neuro Teleportal as well. All right, so brace yourself. Here we go. very, very interesting. That has a get-her-done kind of an action feel to it, right? There's like something that just feels very motivational with that. So what is the best way for folks to use this? Do you hold an intention? Do you hold your dream? Is there something to it, or do you just let it be?
You just let it be. You don't have to. A lot of people will use this when they're meditating. There's nothing wrong with that. But the frequencies in and of themselves, they're the driver. You're the passenger, and you just let them take you like where you want to. But there's certainly nothing wrong. We've had lots of people write in and say that they would go in with conscious intention, and they would have a similar experience. It might be a little bit different qualitatively, but these are frequencies that very much unlike binaural beats, and unlike isochronic tones, unlike any other kind of sound-based therapy, you can simply let them play without headphones in the background, and you can also play them as a silent varying magnetic field. But we get most of the reports that we've had for many years. These are people that are just playing them on their stereo. The important thing to keep in mind is that our tracks do work through resonance. And so what that means is most tracks are about 5 to 10 minutes in length. And the best results when you're listening to them is to have the volume set so that you can feel the track's pulse on your skin. If you've got it loud enough so that it's comfortable for you to hear, but you can still physically sense the tracks, you're good to go.
Okay, physically feeling them. Well, this is where it gets fun because this is innovative and it's backed by your research and your scientific investigation, cross-disciplinary approach. I really do love it. It's available for all listeners to check it out and get these frequencies in their lives as well. Thank you so much for this. Your special offer is available on the webpage. We invite our listeners to check out the various options there. This has been really fascinating. I really honor the scientific researcher in this, and again, love to see it bridging with consciousness and wellness of humanity and just being on the leading edge of this. It is incredible, and it's going to be fun to see it get out there in the world based on the reports from people using these frequencies. Again, it cannot go wrong. It is just a frequency mapped out of wellness. And so we're going to listen to Neuroteleportal as we say goodbye and close our circle today. Oh my goodness, Don, I just want to give you a moment to wrap up our call today with some few words on the importance of this work for humanity.
Well, Lauren, it was a great pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate just the feedback, the insight, the input, the support. The greatest benefit that this tool has is to really tangibly, physically banish the monkey mind. The noise and the distortion that's toxic, that gets into our mind, emotions, and body. This actually really can be purged. And the biggest benefit that our users and members have seen from this is in some cases for the first time in their lives, actually being able to individually, consciously, dynamically take control in a measurable way, a practical, concrete way of not only banishing that noise, but installing the state that they want and then actually experiencing that state and benefiting from that state.
Beautiful. This is really assisting us to exit the programming, the matrix, as some like to call it, banishing the monkey mind and taking conscious control, installing the state and the benefits we wish to experience. It is beautiful work that you're doing, and I just honor you and thank you so much for that work. Thanks for this quantum conversation. And now, as we dance our way to the cosmic heart, let's enjoy Neuro Teleportal. All of this music is available in Don Adams' special offer available on this website. Thank you for listening, and thank you for dancing with us in our collective intentions as they go across the universe to the cosmic heart. I'd like to thank my wonderful team at acoustichealth.com, Heidi, Tony, Tom, Pam, Suzanne, and Garner, who assist with the production of Quantum Conversations, online healing retreats, and more. And thank you, too, for listening. If you've enjoyed this program, please share it with your friends and loved ones. And we thank you for shining your magnificent light and adding it to the world. This is when we love ourselves like no one else can. We leave you now with music from the universe. Music literally created by the universe as musical notes were assigned to mathematical equations. The result is this beautiful music available at acoustichealth.com. Namaste.